Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I am talking with David Wellington, author of Paradise-1. Thank you, David, for joining me.
Hi, Dakota. Thank you so much for having me on.
So, Paradise-1 is the biggest of your books so far. What happened?
So many people who've been following me for a while probably don't know that I actually released a science fiction trilogy, starting with the book Forsaken Skies, under the name D. Nolan Clark. And strangely enough, those books were also this long. I don't know. It was a lot of story to tell. So it came out to 180,000 words, which is a lot. It's a lot. I think my first published book, Monster Island, was 95,000 words. So this is twice as long. I don't know. It didn't feel that long when I was writing it, and I hope it doesn't feel that long when you're reading it.
No. The chapters are so short. It seems like you're reading like 200 pages, and then it's done and you're like, no, don't end.
Yeah, I always think of myself as having this very spare style. I don't spend a lot of time like just on descriptions, or when they're not necessary, or like inner monologues when you could just have two characters speak to each other for 5 seconds and get the same information. So like I'm a big fan of just very clean, simple writing, and yet somehow here we are. This thing just started sprawling. It's a huge story is the issue. It's just like a big complex plot. I say complex, and that sounds bad, but it's this big sprawling plot that needs all this room, and it felt right. I promise the sequel is shorter. I'm working on it right now, and it's going to come in around 120,000 words. So
Okay.
people are you don't have to worry. You're in good hands.
It really doesn't feel that long. I was just surprised when I got it in the mail because I had read the electronic version and it didn't seem that big. And then I was like, oh gosh, it is huge. So
Yeah.
it was like one of those, oh, it is a very long book. I should have realized. um, so how did you get started on this? Because your acknowledgments say the story came from a couple people, right?
Yeah, this is a very strange process. Unlike anything I've ever done before. So I've always written a book and then turn it in, and the editor either says yes or no, and then they want changes, fine. But this started with the editors at Orbit UK, had this idea that they knew was kind of in my wheelhouse. And so they came to me and they said, hey, we like working with you. We've got this idea. Can you develop it into something? So they gave me like the bones of the story. They gave me the characters that they wanted to see in this, just sort of a rough sketch, and said, go ahead and develop it, make any changes you want, like see what you can make out of the story. I thought it was going to be just a terrible experience because I thought it was going to be constantly having editors sign off on every sentence. That was not what they wanted at all. They wanted a David Wellington book. They just had this cool idea. And so as I explored the idea, I started realizing just how cool it was and how it could go in all these different directions. And there was very little pushback from the editors at all. They loved what I was coming up with. I loved writing it, and it all kind of came together. So yeah, no, this is the first time the whole story is not mine, and I acknowledge that very clearly in the acknowledgments. And I want to make sure people know that this was, James Long, especially my editor at Orbit UK, was crucial to coming up with the story here, but he let me tell it in my own way.
How did he approach you with it? Was he like, hey, I just have an idea?
So I had written a book I wrote the 3 science fiction novels under Dino and Clark, and then I wrote a 4th one, The Last Astronaut, under my own name, which came out in 2019, and it was actually shortlisted for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, which is the most recognition I've ever had for anything in my career. So that was super, super exciting.
It
The book
was
did
so
really
good.
well.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it sold really well. It was a success, and so they knew they wanted to keep working with me. The American branch of Orbit was looking for something else. The UK branch of Orbit came to me directly with this, and they were like, we know you're an American author, but why don't you just work with us directly instead of how you would normally do it? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? So it was really just, it was a question of all these different fiefdoms and departments kind of had to like get each other's okays and approvals, is why it took so long. But we eventually we got to a point where it was just like, yeah, why not? They like me, I like them. Why don't we just work together?
It seems like a really great collaboration, because this story is so complex. You have two main characters and then 2 other main characters, it seems like. So
Yeah, okay.
yeah,
There are 4 main characters. They're the 2 who are kind of like the viewpoint characters, and the other 2,
yeah.
they come into their own in the sequel and the 3rd book, trust me.
So they picked up speed halfway through the book, and I was like, yes, I get more rapscallion.
Yeah. Everybody loves the robot. Yeah, no, that was the best idea we had. Was so they had this idea about this sort of like sarcastic robot, and I was like, well, why would a robot be sarcastic? Why is a robot even doesn't why does this robot even care about human language or customs or feelings, right? So the robot starts out very kind of anti-human, and not like kill all humans, but more like, oh, these humans are a waste of my time. And it feels very kind of I kind of took a little inspiration from Marvin the Paranoid Android from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But then I was like, but what if that character then developed like a human character would have an arc over time? How does a robot have an emotional arc? And so that story will continue in volumes 2 and 3. But I feel like Rascallion grows a great deal during this book.
He does, and in such a short time too, because it's like everything feels like is all happening all at once. And Rapscallion is one of those characters that you can just see a clear arc of like, oh, he called them his friends. Oh,
Yeah, and of course, he has a very strange definition of what a friend is. But, yeah.
I mean, some people do anyway. So it seems like this book, it needed multiple perspectives. How I guess, how did you choose who to focus on, or like how to tell the story, I guess, in these multiple perspectives?
I have a very hard and fast rule, which is that if you're doing multiple perspectives, you can't do the same perspective twice in a row. So every chapter has to be a different perspective. That being said, I broke that rule a couple times. Because you have to, and during edits, things get deleted and whatever, it happens. But for the most part, it was just I wanted this to feel chaotic. I wanted it to feel like all of this is happening in this crazy pace all at once, which means that different people are seeing different slices of the action, and sometimes like radically different parts of what's going on. And so that gives you all these wonderful dramatic opportunities for irony and subtlety that you just wouldn't have if it was one continuous viewpoint. And there is a lot to be gained by having that one viewpoint. I did that a lot early in my career. The Laura Jackson books are almost completely from her viewpoint. And those I really got into her head. Like she's still my favorite character that I've developed, just because I spent so long with her, over 5 books. Like she became very real to me. That being said, when you can do multiple viewpoints, you can tell such a bigger story. There's just so much more room to move around in.
I loved how it added to the suspense. Like, I think if it had just been Petrova, it wouldn't have been as suspenseful. Um, that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, people who don't know what we're talking about. So there are four main characters. One of them is a robot. We've established that. So there is Alexandra Petrova, who is sort of a detective, and she works for a group called Firewatch, which is basically it's like the sheriff of the Old West, right? Except for it's the outer planets. She's on Jupiter's moon Ganymede at the start of the book, and she gets dragged into this thing where it turns out there's a colony planet 100 light years away. It stopped responding to Earth. Like there have been no communications with Earth for over a year. And so they want her to go check out what's happening. She's joined by a doctor. She doesn't know why at the beginning of the book, and he definitely doesn't know why he's being made to do this. Dr. Zhang Lei, he's been through a lot. So without spoilers, this man has suffered some pretty significant trauma, and it has led to him being a little antisocial. Yeah, we're laughing about this as we're recording because we know how that plays out. And then they have a very, charismatic pilot named Sam Parker, and finally Rapscallion the robot, who basically prints new bodies for himself whenever one gets blown up or damaged. And so he often will like make himself look like some kind of like movie monster or some horrific shape just to freak out the humans. And they're always bright green, this like toxic green color, because I thought that would be the most annoying thing. If you had to deal with a robot with ugly green color all the time. Yeah, so these four are going to go to this planet, Paradise-1. That's where the title comes from, is the planet's name. And they're going to find out what happened. And of course, it takes a turn from there.
Yes, it does, dramatically and very quickly. um
It's
but
so hard to talk about this book because it's like anything is a spoiler,
I
basically.
know after chapter 3, I'm like, I can't tell anything. Everything is just, you have to read it. um but I think you do those horror elements so very, very well. And it seems like you've had a lot of practice, to be fair, with your Laura Craxton books and the Monster Island books. And did you find it difficult with having these four different perspectives, trying to find who got to tell what information?
Not really. It was always I kind of like picked, like you said. I mean, I'm a horror writer and a science fiction writer. That's my skill set. And so when you're doing horror, you pick the person who's in the most danger. You pick the person who's most likely to die in the next 5 minutes. And it's a really good practice. Now, for science fiction, sometimes you need the person who's actually like looking at the computer screen, or like the person who like, gets like the big exposition dump. But for the most part, like horror is about not knowing. It's about not having all the information, and so there's a lot of that.
Right up to the end, it seems like you have surprises around every corner, which
I
is
do want to
impressive.
stress, I do want to stress to people this is a standalone novel in and of itself. Like it has, yes, there is a link to the next book, without giving anything away. But you could just read this book. It has a satisfying story of its own in itself. I know a lot of people wait, if there's a trilogy, they wait for the third book to come out. This drives authors crazy because the only way our publishers know if we're any good is if that first book sells. So if
Right.
you wait until the third book comes out, the publisher's already like, oh, I guess this didn't work. This was a failure. No, the people were just waiting. Oh, it's nuts. So just go buy the book. Please. If you want to see stuff like this get published, you have to buy that first volume, and you gotta like, and yes, you'll have to wait. It won't be too long. The second volume is already written. I'm going to turn in my publisher at the end of the month, and then we go from there. So it won't be a long wait, I promise.
That's okay. I'm willing to wait. Just stew in the ending. um, so um this okay, so the setting is the most horror element.
Mhm.
Um how it's just the vastness of space, right? And you chose to leave them in space, like in spaceships, that have things happen to them. Why didn't you choose to go down to Paradise-1, or why didn't you choose to like, um, I don't, I don't know. I just like, I love the setting so much, and I want to know how you got there.
So we're that's fringing on spoiler territory, of course. But so yeah,
It
much of the
is.
book takes place in space, on various spaceships, and it is because that's like a terrifying place to be. It's great for horror,
Yeah.
uh, because like everything is trying to kill you all the time. Just being in space is a stupid thing to do in terms of your own safety, and yeah, so it just the horror writes itself. Now, yeah, like this story needed to start there, and it absolutely develops from what happens in space before you get to the planet. So yeah, we needed to stay there for quite a while, to develop, what is the monster at the heart of this book, right? What is the bad thing that is going to happen to these people? Um, yeah, and I just knew that, because I know what happens next in book two and book three. And it's a lot of twists, a lot of surprises, but also it is its own story that needs to develop else in other places. So we needed a closed environment to start with. That's the thing about any big world building story. The best way to start is in a tiny little room,
Right. Yeah.
and then you open the door and you walk outside, and then you start seeing that this is a much larger universe than we thought. So yeah, starting from a very claustrophobic place, like say the glass tube that you're in when you're in cryosleep, when you travel to another planet, right? So yeah, you start small and you work out, and this series is going to go some pretty far-fetched places.
I'm with it. I will stick with you to the end.
Thanks.
Um, I was just surprised because you have so many other moments in just like the first couple of chapters where you could have written entire stories just off of that. Like Petrova in the first chapter is running after a fugitive, right? And that in and of itself could have been a huge story, right? But you make it a chapter and a half, maybe.
Well, it ties into the bigger story, of course.
Yes.
It's crucial to, and again, it's you start small and you build. But I discovered, so what happened was when I wrote 13 Bullets, which was my first vampire book, it started out as a short story that was like 3,000 words long. And I loved that short story. I loved the main character, Jameson Arkley, if people remember these books. And it just grew in my head. It was just like, oh yeah, from there, what are this guy's further adventures? What is the world he lives in really like, and so on. And when you can start with like it's a really good, quick story with some like action sequences and some fun to it, and like a great character, you're 90% of the work is done for a novel, right? You can build on that endlessly if you just start with that great character and that great first moment.
Yeah. It's just, I would find it so difficult to stop and keep it short and sweet, right? Get just the point across that you need to introduce Petrova and kind of some of her backstory. Or even Zhang. Dr. Zhang has such an intense backstory, and we
Yes.
only get it through these little glimpses, and it's horrifying that way. But also, if you would have told the story from his perspective in there, it would have been horrifying too. So I applaud your ability to stick to one story.
I knew the Zhang story is just it's so bad in terms of just like it is just such an upsetting thing that I didn't want to lead with that, because I didn't want to make people think, oh, this world is just hopeless and awful. I wanted to give this like little cop story of Petrova running on the ice of Ganymede, chasing after this guy she thinks is a serial killer, and as dark as that is, right? That's actually like it's the lightest, most fun thing in the book. So I wanted to start a little, a little lighthearted and build from there. Get to the really nasty stuff later.
I thought that opening sequence with her laying in the dust was perfect. And then her like getting up and bouncing. And I was like, oh God, how do you chase somebody on the moon?
Yeah.
um, I just thought it was like a brilliant little snippet of who she was before the real story started. So thank you. Um,
I liked it.
Go ahead. um, so how did you switch from self-publishing to traditional publishing?
So it very quickly is the answer. So I've been writing since I was 6 years old.
Okay.
Nothing I wrote when I was 6 years old was any good. I'm not claiming that. But as I grew up, I got better, and I knew I was a decent writer. I knew that I could tell a good story, but I just couldn't get published. When I started out, this was 2003. Not when I was 6 years old. 2003 was when I moved to New York City, and I had kind of moved here because I had friends here, but also because I knew this was where the publishing business was, and I thought maybe I could like meet somebody and like break in that way and get somebody to read a manuscript. Nope, didn't work. Utter failure. So at the time it was next to impossible to get a book published. It was just you really kind of had to mail a manuscript to somebody and hope that they would pick it up off their desk. There are all kinds of different avenues to do that now that are different, some much harder. I'm not claiming it's easy at all, but it's a different world. Publishing is a completely different world than it was back then. So I had this idea for a story. My friend had a blog and he just didn't want to do his blog anymore. This was 2003. It was like the height of the blog craze. But he was bored. He didn't want to do the blog anymore. He said, you take over my blog. I said, well, I'm not a journalist. I'm not an essayist. I'm a fiction writer. And he said, yeah, just put a book on there. I don't care. Um, and I was like, okay, fine. Well, give me 6 months. I will come up with a story, characters, whatever. I'll think of something. And he's like, no, I'm done with this. You can start on Monday. So I ended up writing Monster Island in real time. So what that means is that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would write a short chapter and post it on the web. Unedited, unoutlined, unprogrammed, whatever. And I knew it was going to be 60 installments long. I knew that would take 5 months. The first chapter I put up, just there's no explanation for anything, no preface, no warning. It's just suddenly here's some fiction for you. And 7 people looked at that first chapter. One of them was my mom, and one was my roommate, who said, I couldn't read this because it's scary, but good job. In the second chapter, I had like 40 people. And by the 60th final chapter, I think it was 40,000 people were tuning in 3 times a week to get their Monster Island update. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew it was a lot of fun. It was crazy. Just like I was exhausted and just I was reading comments on stuff I had written the day before. Incredible comments. Sometimes people figured out where the plot was going, so I had to change the plot in its mid chapter. So it was a crazy experience. I just such an education in writing, and that's all I thought it was going to be. And then a publisher contacted me and said, I like this. What do you think about making this a printed book? And I was like, yes, please. That was my entire reaction. Yes, please. So I didn't care about how much money it was. I didn't care if it was a good publisher or not. I was just, yes, please. And I didn't look back. And now in 2023, I've officially now been doing this for 20 years. I have not had a job other than writer in those 20 years, and I love it. This is my life. This is what I've always wanted to do. This is my dream job when I was a kid, and I got to do it. It is just the most exciting, fun thing ever. And I am entirely grateful to everybody who's read my books and followed me and given me encouragement along the way. It meant everything to know that other people were reading these stories and actually enjoying them. Like that was all I ever wanted, and I got it. I'm thrilled.
I'm so happy that you got hooked up with Orbit too, because they seem like a great science fiction publisher. And well, Paradise-1 came out of it too, but also
Yes.
um, did you find that working with because you've worked with a couple different publishers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Random House and HarperCollins and Corbett,
Yeah.
a couple others.
Did they I assume they each had like their own type of feedback. Um, do you feel like you have more freedom with Orbit or like with how you write for them?
So the editors at Orbit are given a lot of power, which is an extremely cool thing for a publisher to do. So the editors can like actually make decisions there in a way that I think at some other publishing companies maybe there's a little more oversight, and a little more corporate oversight is what I mean. Like, so there's a little more push to do something that is strictly commercial or that is, that is going to be a success. I think Orbit takes more risks, and they kind of have this sense that great science fiction isn't always like what was hot last week. Um, Orbit has an incredible history. They have published some of the greatest authors in science fiction. My personal favorite, Ian M. Banks, was an Orbit author. Like, it's awesome just being part of that team, of that history, and I love it. I have had no complaints about Orbit. It's a great house.
That's fantastic. And it seems like I don't know what it seems like, but I enjoy the work that you're putting out with them. And I don't know. I feel like they're a great publisher. I just always find their books and I'm like, I'll probably buy an Orbit book today. um,
One thing I love about Orbit books is they do this thing where they will put like the first chapter of a completely different book at the back of every book they publish. And it's so great because you can like discover a new author that you had never heard of, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, I need more of this. And it's just they so want their authors to succeed, and they will just absolutely it does really feel like being on a team, especially like for this one where like this was literally a collaboration, with the editorial staff and the entire staff of Orbit. Like everybody there has been part of this, like picking out titles and then like, giving feedback on stuff. It's just such an incredible creative place to work.
yeah. And going back to that, is there something in the book that you can point to that is like strictly yours that you were like, I included this one?
That's so difficult because it's like everything, it was such a back and forth when we were
Okay, yeah.
first working out the story. I think that, I created the sort of, well, like, so Alexandra Petrova, the main character, essentially has this kind of complicated relationship with her mother, who it's more than just family drama. Her mother was kind of this fascist dictator, who kind of ran her organization, that Petrova works for, Firewatch, and then got, pushed out, not happily. So there's like political drama and family drama at the same time, and this character just wants to make a name for herself. She just wants to be taken seriously and doesn't want to be a nepo baby. So I think I there was some suggestion that she'd had this famous mother, but I think I kind of like built on that to where that became an incredible central part of the story. um yeah, that's how it worked. It all started like there the editors came up with like these characters who just had so much potential, and it was just fleshing them out. The whole thing was just world building and fleshing out characters and just building something that resembles not at all what we started with. Like the change from that first document is enormous, but none of it is like 100% me. And none of it is 100% the editors. You know, even James Long, who started this whole project, is not like the daddy of this. It was absolutely a collaboration.
I love hearing that because I feel like publicists, what the?
Publishers,
Yeah, thank you. Why the hell?
it happens.
Publishers must have, they've got to see like everything, right? And they must have these wonderful ideas. And if you don't have time or you don't feel like you have the skill, it's got to be nice to be able to tap somebody and actually make a good collaboration like this.
I mean, it's not, you know, this is something that happens. It probably happens more often than you think. Like we know that Pride and Prejudice and Zombies started out with an editor, not with an author. You know, Seth Grahame-Smith did wonders with it, but don't get me wrong. But that started out like some editor just had some fun idea over lunch one day. You know, absolutely like Christopher Paslin in the Aragon books
Oh,
started
yeah.
his dad kind of like pushed him into this idea. And his dad happened to work at a publishing company, you know. So yeah, there's always this sort of back and forth with editors. I know that I have gotten some incredible advice from editors over the years. I had an editor when I started writing my vampire books. My original idea was that vampire books would be a sort of monster of the week thing, where each volume would be a different kind of monster. And the editor said, "Nope, vampires all the way down." And I was like, "Oh, come on, let me have my freedom. Why are you penning me in?" Best idea ever, like best plot ever. Let's just stick with vampires, because that series I think is still some of my best work, and it absolutely came from just focusing and drilling down on this one idea. And that editor absolutely had the right idea. So like no author works in a vacuum. Like we are all talking to editors and fans and readers and everybody else, and we get ideas. You know, it's not like authors just sit down and think really hard and a book pops out of their foreheads. You know, there's always going to be influences. There's always going to be somebody behind the story.
Yeah, I that makes a lot of sense. But so you said that you did like you were doing the world building around these characters, and the world does feel very solid. Like you don't have information dumps and you don't really have a lot of world building, but I think what's there does a lot of work. Like I can get an idea of what happened with Earth and why there's colonies. Um, did you have to like scale back or scale up your world building at any point?
I always use a really light hand with world building. I think that it's in fantasy novels, I think that there is a place for, you know, 3 chapters on how the wheat gets from the fields of blah 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 to the free city of next place. And that can be fun when you're building something so intricate like a fantasy world. I think in science fiction and especially in horror, though, you really kind of want to take a light hand with that sort of stuff. It can be so distracting from the mood that you're trying to set, the tone. And in horror tone is everything. Like a horror novel only works if you can make people feel like anything could happen next and it will be bad. Um, so sitting down for 3 chapters and talking about, you know, how exactly did the United Earth government decide to colonize this planet? Well, you leave it a little bit vague, give a clue, but then move on because there's much more to the story. The important story is what's happening right now.
Right. Um, so I love how you can switch the tone so easily though in this book, maybe because the chapters are so quick. But you go between horror and action sequences pretty easy and seamlessly. But then there's also like moments of levity or like moments of real like self-reflection.
Mhm.
And I think you do those so well, and the tone shifts with each one, and it's so wonderful. Um,
Well, thank you. I like to think of it that the tone is modulated. It
yeah.
rises and falls, right? It's got a rhythm to it. So yes, I mean, if it was just all evil and danger and death all the time, that would feel like a heavy metal album. And that, as much fun as those are, you don't want to sit with one for 25 hours, which, maybe you do. I don't know. But no, you need to kind of like give people time to breathe a little bit because that makes the next scare that much worse. If it's just all scares all the time, it's gothic madness and it's crazy and bats and belfries, which I love, but it's not the story I was trying to tell here. I especially love the fact that they let me do a lot of humor in this one. I Humor is one of those things people it gets such a bad rap, and like I love Terry Pratchett. I love Neil Gaiman. I love people who can like actually be funny and still tell a really moving story. Uh, I don't know if I'm at that point, but I absolutely want to give you occasional moments of fun just to keep things from getting so dark. Rapscallion was absolutely the perfect foil for this. His comments on humanity are just, I love those scenes the most. Just getting to tell you how a robot feels about your dirty underwear, and that he has to pick up. Just it was just like, oh, that was just such a breath of fresh air in this story because you can get too heavy, you can get to a point where it feels hopeless and just feels like these characters are just going to die. Sometimes in horror they do, but you don't ever want to feel like that's the only thing that can happen because then it's just you're waiting, it's just a countdown, you're waiting for this character to die, and that's just a bummer.
You cycle through the characters pretty effectively too on who thinks they're going to die in the moment. And another character is always ready to be like, no, we have an idea. Let's just stick with it for a few minutes, see if it's working. um,
I honestly think my biggest failing as a writer is that I have too much faith in my characters. I think that a lot of great horror has been made out of people who just made bad choices or who, didn't have the psychological resources to deal with what happened to them. Some of the great horror stories are like that. I don't write those. I write stories about smart people doing smart things. And it's just how my brain works. If I was in a situation like this, I don't know how I would actually react. I like to think I would think my way out of it. I would think of, oh, what's our plan? What are we doing next? I know that I've been in very few real crises in my life. I've been very lucky, but whenever I'm in a dangerous situation or like somebody I care about is in trouble, I immediately go into planning mode. I immediately think, okay, put all the emotions aside right now. You know, yes, I'm sweating and I can't stop shaking, but I'm going to think about what's happening and how we fix this. And maybe I'm completely wrong, but at least I will like keep moving.
yeah.
And I think that is the key to survival in this world. Often, strange as it sounds, I mean that's just how I think of my characters. Going back to like Laura Caxton or even DeKalb from Monster Island, like you gotta just keep thinking, okay, this is bad, this is really bad. I don't know what I can salvage from this, but I gotta keep trying.
Well, it always feels like Petrova's reactions are very organic. Like her emotional center shuts down and she's like, this needs to happen, like we're not, like it just needs to happen. And then Zhang is the emotional one. um, which makes them really great together, bouncing off of one another, but it does feel very organic that you would have one panicky person and one who's like, I need to keep doing something even if it is unhealthy mentally.
And
Like,
she does end up paying for that
yeah.
as the story goes along. She doesn't always get it doesn't always work. Her plans don't always work. And sometimes Zhang's panicky reaction is the right one. And I wanted to show that. I wanted to show that these are actual human beings. They're not superheroes. You
Yeah.
know,
So it
especially Zhang, and I hope I did this with real sensitivity. Zhang has mental illness problems. Like his mental health is not good at the beginning of the story. And yeah, and he's put in a horrible situation. It doesn't help. Uh he does grow in this story and becomes much more capable over time. But at the beginning, he is not the person who should be in the situation.
No, but he's always willing to step up, even
Yeah.
if it's like terrifying him and he's going to have a heart attack on the way. He's like, okay, somebody has to do this with you, I guess. um,
Well, of course, he's the only one who actually knows what's going on for a big part of the book. Nobody believes him when he tries to tell them. And so he's the classic scientist character, right, in science fiction, who is like warning everybody, oh no, the giant ants are going to come invade the town. And everyone's like, giant ants, who cares about giant ants? So, when they actually show up, he's the one who's actually ready. Yeah.
I
So
think you
he's not just a foil. He's not just a funny,
right. Yeah.
reaction shot. He is absolutely crucial to this plot.
He is. And like, I didn't realize how much I was going to like him because in the beginning, he seems like such an unreliable narrator because he
Yes.
is having these moments of panic and these moments of chemical reliance from his RD.
Yeah.
Um,
Very bad flashbacks. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
So
you
you're
know,
never sure with him.
right.
Yeah.
But I think he's also the heart of the story in the end. I think people will come to really care about him and his survival in the like what he's been through already is so horrible, and he's going to take that trauma and turn it into something good, like turn it into how they survive through all this.
Yeah. And it feels like, as awful as this is, some of it is cathartic. Like he is not the crazy one all the time anymore.
Yeah,
um,
I mean, nobody believed him for a long time, and now he gets proven correct. It's yeah, there's got to be a certain like I don't know feeling around that. Hopefully, he's not insufferable about it. Though.
no, no, no. He's really great. He became one of my favorites. Him and Rapscallion. I've gotta keep Rapscallion up there.
Rapscallion is everybody's favorite. Of this robot.
The naming conventions of the ships and the AIs in this is very interesting to me because it's all Greek mythology, but you also have elements of each myth in the corruption that the AIs go through.
So each big spaceship in this world has an artificial intelligence running it,
Yeah.
and often that artificial intelligence is the only pilot or captain of the ship. And these are not Chat GPT artificial intelligence. These are actual computers that can think and make decisions. Um, that turns out to be a real problem for everybody involved. Which I won't go into because of spoilers. But yes, so the names from Greek mythology, those came straight from Orbit. Those were from the publishers, the editors, etc. They were like, no, we want the ship to be called Artemis. And I was like, well, NASA actually is putting a ship called Artemis on the moon soon. And they're like, yes, great. So we went with it. So great. So I kind of like played with that a little bit. And I wanted it to mean something. So each AI appears as the mythological figure that they're named after. With
Yeah.
it's not a one-for-one correspondence, but they're based on that sort of myth. And then as they are corrupted, they which spoiler right there. Okay, so as they are corrupted, they kind of turn into demonic monstrous forms of those Greek myths. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun. That was
They
really fun to write.
it wasn't like completely obvious though. Like there's a lot of like random Greek myths that I really don't know. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna look up this name. Oh, that was smart.
I picked a couple of them just to be obscure, but yeah.
Yeah.
But they're all meaningful, and they all like actually say something about what that ship is all about and how it goes wrong.
Yeah. Not that anything goes wrong. Don't feel like anything ever is going wrong.
Yeah, no, it's a perfectly happy, simple science fiction story where science saves the day.
I mean, so the second book that you're working on, is it gonna be similar to this one? Like and
It's a
theme and
direct
tone?
sequel. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, the trilogy tells one story. It's Petrova, Zhang, and Rapscallion and Parker all the way through.
Okay. And is it horror elements all the way through then? Okay,
Horror
fantastic.
slash science fiction slash horror. You got your peanut butter and my chocolate, whatever. Uh, they're two genres that just work so well together that yeah, it's why they came to me for this, because I'd proven I could do both genres. I started out, so when I was a kid, I was a science fiction fan. I had seen Star Wars in 1977 at age 6. Like I said, I started writing at age 6 because I'd seen Star Wars and I wanted to write Star Wars. At the time, there was only one Star War, and it was going to be years before the next one came out. And it was just, I couldn't handle that. So I started writing my own stories. And so I always thought of myself as a science fiction writer. And in fact, Monster Island, my first published book, is a zombie story, but I thought of it as a science fiction story. The original idea for it was that an astronaut on the space station was going to land on Earth and
Mm.
find that the Earth had been taken over by zombies. Um, that is not the story of Monster Island. It is a very different story now, but that was where it started from. So I thought of it as science fiction as I was writing it. People immediately pointed out to me, no, it's about zombies, it's horror. And so I got to be known as this horror writer, and so I did vampires, I did werewolves, and so on. But always I wanted to write science fiction. So much later, when I got the chance, I ran with it. And combining those two genres is now my thing. It's my brand. As much as I hate the idea of having a brand, and I loathe the idea of having a brand, but if people think about me as the guy who does science fiction horror, I'm okay with that. Those are two things I love, and I will absolutely always be here to write another science fiction horror.
Fantastic. Are you working on anything other than the upcoming sequels?
Yes, nothing is ready to talk about yet, but I'm working on a straight horror novel that I'm hoping there will be room for in this world. I'm working on those sequels, and we're already talking about what comes after that. So yes, there will be plenty
Fantastic.
more books.
You're still writing.
So I've published 22 novels now, and I have a shelf that is about 2/3 full, a bookshelf of just my books, one copy of each, and I want to finish this shelf. That is my goal. That is like my biggest goal in life, is completely fill the shelf.
You can do it.
Oh, I hope so. I'm gonna keep trying.
I've already started my David Wellington shelf.
I saw that. That looks
It's
awesome.
not as big as it could be, but
You got some good ones there. I love those. So if people are listening to this and they can't see what she's talking about, so she's got my vampire books behind her, as well as The Last Astronaut and Paradise-1. And the vampire books are some of the best covers I have ever seen. Oh my God, I love these covers. They're just these black and white pictures of screaming vampires
it
with
is
like,
horrifying.
yeah, all the text is in like day glow colors on this black background, and they just stand out so well. I love that. I love that design.
I love that they are Nosferatu vampires too. Like, oh my God, I loved that element.
Well, in 2005, when I started writing 13 Bullets, the big thing was not even Twilight. It was Laurel K. Hamilton.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
was writing, her stories about vampires. And it was right when the romantic vampires thing was starting to bloom. And so my thing was, I don't want to be like everybody else, which of course terrible idea for anybody who wants to like make money writing, but okay. So I didn't want to be like anybody else. So I was like, I'm going to make the scariest, most least romantic vampires I can think of. So these things are grotesque. They are awful. And they don't want to date you. They want to rip your head off and drink the blood out of your bloody stump of a neck. Like it is just gruesome stuff. And I stand by it. I made the right choice for me. The world chose differently. The world chose Twilight. So that's fine. That's what
So
vampires are now.
when I went and picked up Paradise-1 from my local bookshop, because I pre-ordered it, the woman who owns the bookshop was like, "Have you heard of his vampire series?" And I was like, "I have." And she was so excited to tell me about the Nosferatu vampires and like how scary they were. So people love them. Like they might not have been the craze in 2005, 2006, but they have
They did
lasted.
fine. They sold well. I'm not complaining. Like absolutely, there was a vampire fan out there who wanted this, and I made sure they got what they wanted.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Absolutely, always a blast.
And if you guys out there haven't read Paradise-1, I cannot suggest it enough. Maybe I'll put some spoiler notices in this though, so you know not to listen.
We didn't do too badly, I don't think. Believe me, if you listen to this entire podcast front to back 18 times, who knows, you still have no idea what happens in this book, and you will not be ready for it when it does.
It's so good. Ugh. Okay, I'll wait for the second one. I'm waiting. Yeah, so I highly suggest any David Wellington book, really. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dakota. If people want to follow me on Twitter, I am at Last Trilobite, while Twitter still exists. I have a website that is, there's nothing there but an advertisement for this book, so you're already hearing that. So, but it's davidwellington.net. And just thank you so much for this opportunity. I love talking about my books. I don't like talking about myself. Like, I find that really difficult, but you start me talking about my books, I will not shut up, as people may have noticed over the last hour.
It's okay. I mean, this is why I like this podcast, because I want to talk about books, and yeah, people who write them are generally happy to talk about them with me.
Yeah. You put so much of yourself into a book, and all you want is like for people to read it. I don't even care about the money, I don't care about fame. I want people to read my stories. And I want to know that somebody out there was entertained. And it's awesome to hear that you liked this book. I'm really hoping your listeners will too.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great day, and thank you for watching.
Great, thanks very much.